Home ownership in America is changing in a way many of us never imagined. As of 2025, nearly 3/4 of U.S. households are priced out of buying a median-priced new home. Today, we're digging deep into what affordability actually is, why the gap between incomes and home prices is now wider than ever, and whether things might improve or get worse. Let's define terms first. An affordability measure often means, can a family make mortgage payments, insurance, taxes, and fees without spending more than about 30% of their income on housing? That's the typical benchmark. If housing costs exceed that threshold, many are considered cost-burdened. According to a recent special study from the National Association of Home Builders, about 74.9% of U.S. households cannot afford a new home at the median price, which in that study was $459,826, assuming a 30-year mortgage at approximately 6.5% interest. That threshold income required? About $141,366 per year. If you earn less, you're priced out of what is now considered typical new home inventory. The affordability gap isn't just a talking point, it's measurable. And it's widening every single year. According to a comprehensive analysis by CBRE Investment Management, the ratio of home prices to median household incomes has reached levels we've never seen in modern American history. In the 1980s, a typical home might cost 2 to 3 times the average household income. By the mid-2000s, just before the housing crash, that ratio ballooned to 4 or 5 times. But in 2025, the median-priced home now costs 7 times the median household income in some metro areas. That's not just unsustainable, it's a structural problem. Visual Capitalist recently published a striking infographic that charts the gap between median household income and median home prices from 1985 through 2025. What you see is 2 lines moving upward, but one of them is racing ahead. While household incomes have gradually climbed from about $23,000 in 1985 to around $75,000 today, home prices have skyrocketed from $82,000 to well over $440,000 in the same time frame. That's a 5x jump in prices compared to only a 3x gain in income. It's no wonder affordability is collapsing. And the story gets even more sobering when you adjust for inflation. In real terms, the income of a middle-class American family has been relatively flat for the past 20 years. But home prices, even after adjusting for inflation, have surged nearly 120% since the year 2000. To put that into perspective, if home prices had simply tracked income growth, the median U.S. home today would cost somewhere around $250,000 to $275,000. Instead, the actual figure is closing in on $450,000, leaving a gap of nearly $200,000. That's the affordability crisis in a single number. But this isn't just a chart problem, it's a lifestyle problem. When a family has to devote nearly 40% of their income just to housing, as the National Association of Realtors reports is happening today, it leaves very little for everything else: food, childcare, transportation, healthcare, and retirement savings. In other words, housing affordability isn't just about shelter, it's about the entire financial stability of the American middle class. Now let's talk about the so-called good news. If you only read headlines, you might have seen stories suggesting affordability has improved in 2025. But when you actually dig into the numbers, those improvements are so fragile, they're barely worth celebrating. According to the National Association of Realtors, the Housing Affordability Index rose slightly in June 2025, moving from 91.8 in May to 94.4 in June. At first glance, that sounds like progress. Median family incomes rose by just over 4% year over year, while mortgage rates dipped slightly from 6.9% to around 6.6%. But here's the critical point. A reading of 100 means the typical family earns exactly enough to afford a median-priced home with a 20% down payment. Anything below that means they fall short. So even at 94.4, the average family is still not able to buy. Regional differences tell the real story. In the Midwest, affordability is hanging on with an index above 120. That means households there actually earn about 20% more than they need to qualify. but in the West, the index is closer to 70. In other words, the typical family in California or Washington state is earning only 70% of the income needed to buy the median home. That's not a gap you can close with modest income growth. It's a structural barrier that shuts entire generations out. Meanwhile, prices aren't exactly falling. The median existing home price rose to $441,500 in June, up 2% from last year. When you combine that with still elevated mortgage rates, the affordability math doesn't work. Even if incomes rise 4%, they're chasing home prices that climb just as fast. NR's chief economist Lawrence Yun summed it up bluntly. The small gains in affordability we've seen are fragile at best. Unless we see either sustained wage growth or meaningful rate declines, this remains a housing affordability crisis. So, yes, affordability improved on paper, but in real life, for families trying to buy their first home, the situation remains worse than anything we've seen in decades. The affordability crisis isn't affecting everyone equally. It hits some states, some age groups, and some income levels much harder than others. According to the National Association of Home Builders, in high-cost states like California, Massachusetts, and Hawaii, more than 80% of households are priced out of the market. That means even upper-middle-class families with six-figure incomes are struggling to buy. In California specifically, the median new home costs over $760,000, requiring an income of nearly $240,000 a year just to qualify for a mortgage. Compare that to the U.S. median household income of $75,000, and you see why so many families are leaving the state entirely. Young buyers are also bearing the brunt. The median age of first-time homebuyers has risen to 38 years old, the highest on record according to NAR. In 1981, the median age was just 29. That means millennials, now well into their 30s and 40s, are finding it harder than any generation before them to buy a home. The NAHB report also shows that even in relatively affordable states like Texas or Florida, more than half of households can no longer afford a new home. Rising insurance premiums and HOA fees are piling on top of already high costs, pushing families out of the market. And let's not forget racial disparities. A Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies report found that Black and Hispanic households are significantly more likely to be cost-burdened, spending more than 30% of income on housing. For Black households, the home ownership rate remains just 44%, compared to 73% for white households. So while the affordability crisis is national, it's not equal. It's generational, geographic, and deeply tied to inequality. If Americans can't buy, what do? They rent. And that's creating ripple effects across the entire housing ecosystem. CBREIM research shows that multifamily rent growth has consistently outpaced wage growth in many U.S. metros. In 2025, single-family rental prices are growing at 4.4% year over year, according to CoreLogic. That might sound modest, but remember, families are being priced out of buying. Demand for rentals is surging, and landlords know it. The Wall Street Journal noted recently that institutional investors like Blackstone and Invitation Homes have ramped up their purchases of single-family homes to turn them into rentals. These companies are betting that long-term affordability challenges will keep demand for rentals elevated for years to come. For families, though, renting doesn't solve the problem. Nationally, the median rent now consumes nearly 30% of household income, according to Harvard's housing studies. That's the same burden benchmark used for mortgages, so whether you rent or buy, you're cost-burdened. The difference is that with renting, you're not building equity. This creates a vicious cycle. Families who can't afford to buy end up renting for longer, which prevents them from saving for a down payment. The longer they rent, the further out of reach home ownership becomes. Affordability is national, but some metros are ground zero. According to NAHB, Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, more than 85% of households priced out. New York and Boston, above 80%. Even in Austin and Miami, once considered more affordable, more than two-thirds of households can't qualify for a median-priced home. Meanwhile, Midwest metros like Cleveland, Detroit, and Pittsburgh remain relatively affordable, with price-to-income ratios closer to 3 or 4. But even there, affordability is slipping as inventory tightens. So, where do we go from here? Goldman Sachs projects that home prices will rise another 3 to 4% in 2025, driven by chronic undersupply. NAR economists say meaningful affordability improvement won't come unless mortgage rates fall below 5%, which could take years. Lawrence Yun, NAR's chief economist, said, without a significant drop in mortgage rates or a major increase in housing supply, affordability will remain at crisis levels well into 2026, Moody's Analytics agrees, warning that affordability pressures will keep home ownership rates suppressed and rental demand strong. For buyers, patience may be your best tool. Don't stretch into a mortgage that consumes half your income. Look for metros where incomes still align with prices, often in the Midwest or Southeast. For investors, rental demand is a massive opportunity. With 75% of households priced out of new homes, single-family and multifamily rentals are positioned for long-term growth. But caution is critical. Don't assume prices will keep climbing indefinitely. The bottom line is this: housing affordability in 2025 is worse than at almost any point in modern history. Even modest improvements can't mask the fact that the majority of American families cannot buy a median-priced home. The gap between income and price has become a canyon, and without radical changes in rates, wages, or supply, millions will remain locked out of home ownership. This isn't just a housing story, it's a middle-class survival story. And unless something changes, the American dream of owning a home may slip out of reach for an entire generation.